Is it playoffs or bust for the Detroit Red Wings? Is there still belief in the Yzerplan? We're going to discuss that more next on Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in to this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Detroit Red Wings. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'd like to thank you guys both for making Locked On Panthers and Locked On Red Wings your first listen of the day. For everyone on the Red Wings feed, let me introduce myself. My name is Armando Velez, the host of Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I'm also from the Hockey News and grateful to be doing this crossover edition with the two hosts of Locked On Red Wings, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. And fellas, it's great to be getting together with you two once again.
Yeah, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for setting this up. It seems to be a yearly thing for the two of us in the offseason to get together and talk about the trajectory of our two teams and kind of recap their off seasons. Obviously, you're coming off of a pretty exciting off season yourself.
Yeah, you guys are probably sitting pretty here this summer, which is always really fun. But yeah, we always get together once or twice a year, so nice to be back.
Yeah, whether it's Stanley Cup or the Panthers getting the number one overall pick, love getting together and doing these divisional crossovers. But before we get there, we want to tell you guys that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, fellas, I remember on April 16th, I had my fair share of focus for what the Florida Panthers had to do to win the division, obviously winning it against the Toronto Maple Leafs and then Boston losing to Ottawa to clinch the division title. But crazy to think that last game of the season, game 82, everything that was going on in the Eastern Conference was Philly, Washington, the home and home with Detroit and Montreal, and then having to find out only 30 seconds later on the result that happened. Based on the feeling then versus now, along with all the offseason moves, what's the feeling like in Red Wings land for you guys?
Scotty, will first.
Yeah, I think that game was so fascinating for so many different reasons. Obviously, you had the high of the highs and then the low of the lows when you checked the Capitals score. But, I think that people are still really happy that they ended on a high note. The season as a whole was kind of a roller coaster. There were really high highs and some really hot stretches. And then there was one specifically brutal cold stretch that, you could really argue cost them the season. And so I think really going into this summer, the mindset was get more consistent and raise the floor, right? Like we know that the ceiling is going to lie within the young nucleus of as we already have written over there, like Seider, Raymond, Larkin, Cat, you can even like throw into there and kind of has been added into that mix. Like we know the team is going to go as high as that young core takes them. But I think that there was a lot of I don't want to say demanding, but asking for, players to come in and raise that floor and get a level of consistency that we have not seen in Newsy's tenure. Like both years, we have seen huge cold stretches pretty much completely derail the season. And so you saw them address a lot of defense. And I think that was something that they could have got better at. They certainly left a little bit of room on the table, a little bit of a room left to, be desired. I think that people even wanted them to take another step and be even a little bit more aggressive in improving the defense. But they did really address that pretty blatantly, I would say. And I think that that's probably the reason why. So yeah, like vibes are pretty good. I think that, people are really excited about going into the season, but as we'll talk about later, I think expectations are pretty high amongst the fans this year at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to really hammer home, right? Last year going into it, we wanted the Red Wings to, we want them to win a Stanley Cup, but our expectation was to be the last team in or the last team out of the playoffs. And that expectation became a reality in the most heart-wrenching way possible, but they quite literally missed the playoffs on a tiebreaker. So, of course, our expectations, another year into the rebuild, another year of drafting prospects, another year of prospects graduating to the NHL level, is to take another step forward, right? So expectations amongst the fan base are even higher now since they came so close last year. I'm a little mixed. Scotty kind of talked about it there, right? They sacrificed a lot of depth scoring in this offseason by letting Shane Gostisbehere walk, letting Daniel Sprong walk, letting David Perron walk in order to try and create a more defensive-minded bottom six and defensive-minded, like they had a really sheltered bottom pair. So by letting Gostisbehere walk, who's a great power play defenseman, had over 50 points last year, was like I think the top 10 for point scorers among defense. It was crazy. They let him walk because that third pair could not be deployed in any defensive situations really, and that was causing the workload on the top pair, in particular with Moritz Seider, to go heavy the other way. If you ever listen to Red Wings fans on social media or us on our show, right, we talk about how Seider had the toughest deployments in the league last year. So there was definitely a mindset of trying to get better defensively, and of course, part of that is the depth scoring went away a little bit. But I think they did a good job by retaining Patrick Kane and having a full year of him, as well as bringing in Vladimir Tarasenko, who obviously helped the Panthers on their way to a Stanley Cup, to try and supplement some of that scoring loss. And of course, we'll have some young guys. We'll have Jonathan Berggren finally we expect to be a full-time NHLer. And defensively, it'll get better just by having another top prospect in Simon Edvinsson playing a full season. So like the expectation, it's weird because when you have more young guys, there's always that possibility that the team could take a small step back while those players find their footing at the NHL level. But there's also that possibility of just completely exploding outward and upward. So we have I don't want to speak for Scotty, but my expectation for this year is like there's what I want and like a realistic, like they could regress a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I think that most fans align that like this is the year they need to make the playoffs. And I think that's if you asked 90% of Red Wings fans, that's what they would say.
Yeah, and I think about some of the changes that brought where Erik Gustafsson is the guy who went to the conference final last year for the New York Rangers, and for the goaltending department, even then bringing in Cam Talbot, who can't necessarily we haven't seen him succeed in a big workload in the past too, but we've seen him be a little serviceable because we've seen the situation with Ville Husso and struggling with injuries over the last few seasons too. So it creates a little bit of competition there, and someone like Sebastian Coza is not blocked while he could still develop a little bit too. Even Trey Augustine, he can spend a little bit of time in Michigan State too for a little while too, there too. And for the trade of Jake Wallman, I kind of understand why they made the trade too, because you're thinking of Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider and what they're projected. That's probably going to take them up to the cap of those two guys making up of almost 17 million combined too. The future considerations part of the deal, that's kind of what bothers me if I'm looking from far away. But also when you mentioned Simon Edvinsson, as he's going to grow too, that Ben Sherratt deal for them is going to expire by the time he becomes an RFA too. So that gives them an opportunity for that next wave to possibly go there, even if this is maybe even a gap year for Detroit.
Yeah, I think the blue line is something Brian and I have talked about at length. Like it is such a fascinating situation. There's 8 defensemen currently on the roster. Like that's weird. And as you mentioned, Talbot, like Brian brings up all the time, like they currently have 8 defensemen and 3 goalies. Like that is weird. That is abnormal and not something you see too terribly often. And that's something that we've talked a lot about, trying to like sift through and figure out, is this the roster? Like, is that what it's going to look like on opening night? Is there some wiggle room there for some moves? Brian mentioned the young players as well. And if there's some cracks for them to find themselves on the roster, it's weird because there's a lot of bodies, but it's not a lot of high end talent either. Yeah. Like obviously you have Seider, and then as you mentioned, like there's very high hopes for Edvinsson, but like as it stands right now, Sherratt is going to be playing top pair defenseman and Petrie is going to be playing second pair defenseman. And I'm not sure that's really best case scenario. Like if you would have asked people in April when the season ended what they expected the blue line, the top four, to look like, I think people would have wanted to see a lot more and some newer names in there. So it's deep, but it's not necessarily talented. And that's going to be the line that they have to walk this season.
Yeah, and you brought up another good thing too, Armando, about the Sherratt contract expiring when Edvinson's ELC is up, and that is something that Scotty and I have talked about the last 2 years ongoing, about how that you could definitely make the argument, and I really wouldn't push back, that some of the money that Yzerplan has handed out has not been good. Like the Justin Holl contract looks abysmal. Sherratt's probably a little bit of an overpay. Andrew Kopp for sure for what we're getting out of him, like $5.6 million. But one thing that I will still die on a hill for is the term that Yzerplan has given out has been very intentional. And that's why you didn't see him make a lot of moves for like bigger named players this free agency, because, and he came out and said it, he's not comfortable giving out long-term contracts like a lot of players were getting this year. You know, the longest contract he's ever given out so far as general manager of the Detroit Red Wings was 8 years to Dylan Larkin. Everything else has been 5 or less because of exactly that. He understands that if you want to keep a team competitive for longer, you have to consistently have cap coming off of the books. We've done the math. It's like $19 million next year and $18 million the year after that. Like, he's done a very good job of of creating what we call rolling cap space.
Yeah, and it definitely helps them reset and reload every time they have an opportunity. Once again, as those next wave of players come through Detroit and possibly help them raise their floor as the hopes of trying to end their playoff drought. But we are going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to flip it over to the Locked On Red Wings guys and see what kind of Florida Panthers related questions they have for me. We're going to discuss that more next here on this crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Detroit Red Wings. But first, this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors and passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make the car into the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Welcome back to a crossover episode between Locked On Red Wings and Locked On Florida Panthers. Segment 2 is going to be Scotty and I steering, and I kind of want to, it's almost the perfect segue, Armando. We were talking about how the Red Wings really lack defensive talent, and Scotty and I have had conversations about one particular blue liner that is set to be a UFA next offseason, and that's Aaron Ekblad. And I wanted to ask your opinion as a team that is a Stanley Cup contender, right? Literally just came off winning the Stanley Cup. Where are you at on Aaron Ekblad when it comes to like possibly retaining him? Because obviously he's an extraordinary defenseman who plays a really big physical game. He's got a mean streak. Like he has everything you want out of a blue liner and can take really tough deployments. And he's not too shabby on the point production either. Like he's got a career high of 57 points. It's nothing to wag a finger at. Like he can do pretty much everything, but he's already making $7.5 million. He's going to be 29 at the end of the contract, and he's going to be due for a huge pay raise. Does he factor into the Panthers' future?
If it's going to be above the salary that he's currently making, I'm honestly going to say no, because I think about, but also I want to give credit to him too. And I've said this multiple times on the show, how when Paul Maurice came into the mix for the Florida Panthers, he really had to change his game into a more defensive-minded game instead of trying to jump up into the play and get the points there. And obviously, injuries have had a lot to do with that. With Aaron Ekblad, really ever since the 2021 season for him too, that's where he's truly struggled. And even prior to even this playoff run, he was out for a good majority of the end of the season when him and Vladimir Tarasenko collided 2 days after the trade deadline. He came back for game 1 of the postseason. But for Aaron Ekblad, I mean, for that deal for him, it's gonna, and credit to him, he took the money one year before his ELC expired, so he got to get that there for what he was worth there. But also with Bill Zito coming being in the mix now for 4 years, every single contract he's given out hasn't been paying for someone for what they've already done too. And maybe the only contract he's done that so far is for someone like Anton Lundell, who just got paid a 6-year deal, $5 million each. That looks a lot for now, but as it appreciates and he's going to make his way to the second line center, it feels like it's going to age very well for that one. And honestly, even in the last year of the contract, I say that contract really has aged well for even with that time missed for him too. But as far as going forward, if he wants another 8-year deal, I don't think the Panthers are going to give it to him at the number that he wants. And for him, it's crazy because with you guys asking the question, because of based on where he's from just across in Windsor, Ontario too. So it's very interesting to see.
We like to collect those types of players.
Yeah, so maybe he finds a way back home to Detroit, but at what he's making right now, I don't know if the Panthers give him that deal.
I'm going to kind of cheat here and ask a question that's going to involve you and the Red Wings as well. And just, like the one common denominator, obviously, that is now a part of the Red Wings was Vlad, who obviously was acquired by the Panthers last season. Just talk a little bit about his importance to the team, what kind of role he played there. And then I guess if any insight you have on what, we're going to see out of him here. I mean, we've obviously talked a lot about the type of player he is, and hopefully that there's some goal scoring that comes along with him. But the Wings are going to lean on him. Like, he's going to be a second line, presumably, guy, and it might even switch sides as well and play the opposite side that he's played for a majority of his career and certainly recently. So just talk about a little bit about his impact on the Panthers last year and on the Cup run, and then about the Wings.
I mean, for Vlad, first of all, he really wanted to stay in Florida because he's always had a residence down there. He loves. He talks about his home in Weston, Florida, but unfortunately, the bill was due for the Panthers after winning the Cup, and it was always going to be seen as a rental for the Cats there. But for Vladimir Tarasenko, something that Paul Maurice really emphasized is how much he loves to talk on the bench of hockey. Every time he's off the ice, it's always about hockey. He is focused on that. He doesn't really like to talk about anything else. So that's going to be really beneficial for him. And honestly, with him reuniting with Patrick Kane, I'm looking at Daily Faceoff and looking at the projected lines that he's going to be with Kane and JT Compher, who JT Compher has had his experience in winning the Cup too with Colorado. So a line full of Stanley Cup champions, the veterans, to help this group through, I think it could be very beneficial for Vlad, who could really get a lot of offense there for the Panthers, and really for when it came to defensively for Vlad, he gave into the system when it was very crucial for the Cats too, and he really adjusted well there too. It really took him a bit. He went on a little bit of a cold streak during the postseason, but really made some clutch plays, especially in the Rangers series in Game 6 to help them advance to the next round. So he's had some really great moments for the Panthers. And hey, it's great to bring in a guy who's won 2 Stanley Cups there in his career. And hey, Patrick Kane with his 3, it could be definitely for them really inspirational for the young guys.
So I also want to ask you too, like you said, they won the Stanley Cup. They got to pay the piper. That meant picking and choosing who you had to retain and let leave. And obviously Sam Reinhart, after the year he had 50 goals, that was a no-brainer. Keeping Dmitry Kulikov was a great, I would say, get's not the right word, but Anton Lundell as well. But you lost a couple of core pieces too. Do you feel like the pieces that you lost are going to have any, like, how big of an impact, let's say that, how big of an impact do you think the departures will have? Or do you think that the core that is retained is enough to keep this team in that competitive window?
The biggest question is special teams on both sides of the ice for the Panthers, if anything. 5-on-5 play, I'm not so worried about. But Brandon Montour, he was the power play quarterback for the whole season. I know Oliver Ekman-Larsson got into power play 1 towards the end of the final. He also got some term in Toronto too. For them, obviously they bring in guys like Nate Schmidt, Adam Boquist as far as the mix to try to maybe compete for power play 1, and also who knows what Gustav Forsling could be in special teams, as he was mostly in power play 2, but does he take that next step as he's already under contract for 8 more years for the Panthers too? So that's another thing. And on the defensive side of things, this is the loss that no one really talks about as much, and it's Kevin Stenlin. And this was a guy who I was talking about even throughout the season. If there's one guy I would want to see get an extension, at least a 1-year extension, it was Kevin Stenlin. And I looked at $2 million. That was the one that I said, Zito, maybe that could have been one that you could have made work for that one, to bring in continuity on the penalty kill. But hey, they brought in guys like Tomasz Noszak, AJ Greer into the mix too, who are identity players that fit into what Bill Zito wants to build.
Fantastic. We're gonna do another quick break. When we return, we're gonna toss it back to Armando for segment 3, and where we will wrap up 4 W's in a row. Tricky. This crossover episode of Locked On Red Wings and Locked On Panthers. Got to talk to you guys today about FanDuel first. You've heard us talk about it all summer long. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, so you got a little over a month, guys. Get after it. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV, which, I mean, that's a phenomenal promotion because obviously we're all Red Wings fans here, but I myself am a huge Lions fan as well. And why wouldn't I want to be able to watch not just the Lions, but every other team in the NFL, to watch those other teams lose, namely the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. So check out FanDuel and get that free code. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook.
Segment number 3 here on this crossover edition of Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Detroit Red Wings. Thank you once again for making us your first listen of the day. And it's crazy because we talk about steps in the right direction, 91 points, losing on a tiebreaker. But I'm looking at just the when it comes to drafting, you get the 6th overall pick a few years back, 8, 9, 15. Starting to make a little bit of progress too. We spoke about the changes for the Red Wings there, but I also, every single article that I look at when it comes to coaches, hot seats, everything, there's a few names that come up on there. I've seen Mike Sullivan, I've seen Andre Tierney from the Utah Hockey Club, but then I also see Derek Lalonde for the Detroit Red Wings there. How hot is his seat, would you say, coming into this season for Detroit?
You know what? Honestly, I think Brian and I don't know if we've really talked in depth about, like how hot his seat is specifically, but we have talked about Lalonde's upcoming season and kind of the importance of proving that his system works. And I think that that's really the biggest thing. And Brian has brought up a great point before where it's like, They went out and he has a defensive minded scheme. Like that is the Lalonde system that here in Detroit we have heard nonstop since he was hired. And this summer the Wings brought in players to fit that system. They brought in defensive minded forwards. They replaced goal scorers with defensive minded forwards that aren't going to provide as much offense. And so I think that this is a really big year for him. I'm not sure if it's like, oh, if the Wings miss the playoffs, he's going to get canned levels of like, the seat is that hot. I don't know, Brian, maybe you think differently, but like, I don't think it's it's that hot necessarily, but I do think that it's a big year for the eyes of the front office and the fan base, just because again, like they did bring in players to fit what he is trying to accomplish, and if he can't do it this year, then the question is going to start. I think then that's going to make for a really hot seat going in to 2025. But unless this is like a catastrophic failure of a season, I think if they're still, fighting for the playoffs or in that wild card race late, he's probably still fine for another year.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the third year of any coaching regimen is like the litmus test. Like if you can't start to figure it out and head in the right direction by the third year, then your seat's going to start to get warm. And Scotty touched on it earlier. Like Derek Lalonde has overseen two pretty monumental collapses in his first 2 years with the Detroit Red Wings, but at the same time, he's also seen two huge improvements overall for this team. Like they went from, I can't remember 3 years ago. I don't remember what the point total was in the final Jeff Blashill year off the top of my head, but I know it was in the 70s. Derek Lalonde's first year, they got up to 80 points. They were 2 points away from a 500-point percentage. And then the year after that, they jump up 11 points to 91. So, like, while it's fair to criticize him, he also deserves some of the credit for getting this team headed in the right direction. They still have a long ways to go. Like, they were one of the worst 5-on-5 teams in the NHL, and a lot of the reason why they almost made the playoffs when they did was because they survived solely off of timely goal scoring and incredible special teams. Like, they're never going to go anywhere unless they can get their 5-on-5 possession numbers to be better, which, again, is part of what they tried to address this offseason, like Scotty was saying. I do think it's a possibility that if this team gets out to like a horrible start, like an Edmonton Oilers-esque start, maybe even not that far. Like they even let Jay Woodcroft stay on board for way too long. If the Detroit Red Wings, get off to a rough start, I do think you could see him get ejected. Like this is the year for Lalonde that, in my opinion at least, he's got to prove that this team is making progress in those categories analytically. And it's not even one of those conversations either where it's like, well, there's other things besides analytics. Like, yes, there is, of course, but like Derek Lalonde himself is a believer in advanced analytics. Like he brings up 5-on-5 numbers. Like clearly he cares about this stuff, yet 2 years in, those numbers are still in the bottom 10 in the league, despite the goal scoring. And like, it really just has to come down to like, we talk about the defense not really having a lot of top end talent, but last year in particular too, the forwards just did not help defensively at all. Like they couldn't figure out how to play in the defensive zone or how to get the puck in transition and move down ice or just maintain the puck. There was a lot of issues going on, which is, why they brought in some of the guys they did and let walk some of the other guys they let walk. So it really has to come down to, can Derek Lalonde's system take root with this team in its third year? Because there's a lot of players now it's another year where they get to learn the system. And if it does, then I'll feel a lot better about Derek Lalonde because I like him. I like him a lot. He's really good in press conferences too, and he's very candid. It's one of those things where I like a lot of what he says, and I back that theory. But if it's just a theory and you don't see the evidence, then yeah, I'm going to start souring really fast.
Yeah, and I think about it when the Panthers really struggled in transition, especially in their first season under Paul Moritz, even in the regular season. I mean, you just think about what their blue line was in their final pair of Josh Mahura and Radko Gudas. You would see Radko Gudas commit a little bit more to the strong side, and then leaving someone in a breakaway for the goaltender too, for him, and then having the more stay at home guy in like Nico Mikkola, who even not as flashy, leading the team in block shots too, and helping the goaltenders out, helping break out of the zone too. So for Florida, I mean, that really contributed to their Corsi 4 numbers just being in a really good spot for them too. And I think that for Detroit, it's really just one step at a time when it comes to just changing the blue line, because I mean, it's just not something that could change from one year to the next for them in that case too. So that's really for the Panthers, and just that was year one of that too, when they struggled with it, and they still ended up getting hot at the right time, even though they lost in 5 games against the Vegas Golden Knights. So still, it's really, when it comes to like a new defensive system, I can see really the growing pains too. But hey, the good news is it's still a really young core that's still locked up, and that the pieces around it, the guys who are expiring, you could like you said earlier, the cap of being able to turn things over and over again for them, and that puts them still, in my opinion, in a really good spot for the future.
Well, another thing too is like most of the young first round draft picks that Yzerman's made still haven't played in the NHL. Like you got Raymond and Seider really early on. And then this is going to be the first year. It's like, okay, now his 2021 draft pick is going to be in the NHL. Like 22, 23, and now 24 are still all in the NHL. Like they still or not in the NHL. They still have four first-round picks that have yet to make their debuts. They have a very deep prospect pool. But, of course, just like with everything else, that doesn't mean anything until they're in the NHL level making an impact. But, like, there's still, while they continue to get better, there's still a lot left in the prospect pool to make them even better if they pan out.
Mm-hmm.
And we have it written over here on the show sheet. We didn't talk about it too much, but like the big question now is for the fan base from now until the end of the year is just, are we going to get extensions for Seider and Raymond? And it's not a matter of if long term, like they obviously will. It's just a matter of when that happens. I think everybody's really chomping at the bit to lock up. I mean, Seider, absolutely, for as many years as you possibly can. Raymond, I think most people are on board after his great year this past season that they would like him for as many years as possible. But he's one just because he's so young and is a scoring forward, point producing forward. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's in best interest of both parties if that one's more of like a 4 or 5 year thing. Either way, I think that is now where everyone's attention has turned to, right? Like we got through the offseason, we got our additions, we got our subtractions, camp is right around the corner. What's everyone talking about right now? It's just when are these extensions actually going to happen? And one note that occurs, because we have no clue. We just keep waiting, twiddling our thumbs every day. When that does happen, that is that's going to be a huge kind of marker as well for like this young core, right? Like that's what we've been talking about this whole time is, the young core that the Wings are building around. And that's going to be two staples in that young core for, the next 6 to hopefully 8 years. And that's and with Larkin getting the 8-year recently too, that's gonna be a pretty clear indicator of what this core is going to be. And that's going to excite some people.
Yeah. I don't know if I feel like I've shifted some of my opinions recently on the Seider and everything. I think one of them is going to get a bridge deal. I honestly do, just given the cap situation for this year coming up. But Scotty, that's a conversation you and I can have on a separate episode because we're running over, and plus that's a great teaser for later in the week. So Armando, anything left, buddy?
No, actually one more quick rapid fire.
Yeah, let's go for it.
The Red Wings make the playoffs outside of injuries if?
I would say if they don't drop off a cliff in terms of goal scoring. I think that's kind of one of the and we have, we've done whole episodes on what we need to see from the Wings for them to make the postseason and whatnot. But like goaltending is going to be one. Defense, I don't want to steal from what Brian's going to say actually, so I'll stop. But like I think that one of the biggest ones for me is just so many goals walked out the door and you filled them with defensive minded players. That's great. We all wanted the defense to be better, but you still need goal scoring from somewhere. And I think that getting depth scoring from the new additions that they made and from the kids that they're going to call up is going to be really imperative if the Wings want to make a run at this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think they closed the gap, right, between their goals for and goals against in the regard that, like, yes, they lost goals for, but I think they marginally, and I don't think they lost as many goals for as we make it sound. Like a lot of our fear with the loss of goals for is before Tarasenko got signed. I think Tarasenko, if he stays healthy, is good for like 20 to 25 goals at this point in his
quantity,
career.
not necessarily quality. There's a lot of guys that scored 10 to 15, not anybody that scored, a ton.
Right. And I think that acquisition of Tarasenko helps to really soften that blow, and I do think they got better defensively enough to lower the goals against, and that's going to close that gap a lot too between those two. So I think that I do think that if they can stave off regression, right? If they can stave off regression, I think they're absolutely in the mix for the playoffs. I think that they're kind of in the same spot. I don't think they got so much better that I'm like, they're a lock for the wild card. But I think that they're going to be in that mix all the way down to the wire yet again. My big thing is not even like Red Wings related, right? Like I think this team's good. I think they're good enough to make the playoffs. Question is what about the rest of the freaking division? I can't stand this division, Armando. Like that's a whole different thing. Like the Lightning lose Stamkos and they lose Sergachev, but they bring back Ryan McDonough, who had a great bounce back year. They bring in Jake Gensel. Boston is Boston. Like yeah, they lost Ullmark, but every year I think they're going to regress, and they never do. Florida's Florida now. Florida's going to be here for the next 8 years. Like they're now the hot crap in the division. Who else? Toronto's Toronto. They'll make it to the first round and get eliminated. And I've been saying for years, the Senators and the Sabres are. I still don't really know what the Sabres are necessarily doing. I don't necessarily see the vision, but I think they can be good enough. They score enough goals to be a threat. And the Senators, I've been saying for years, like they're a playoff team on the cusp, and yet they got a goalie. Right. And yet they're like the reverse to Boston, where every year they let you down in that regard. So it's a really difficult division. And obviously the Canadiens got a lot better too. Not that I think they're a threat, but they're a much more difficult team to play. So my biggest hesitation with whether or not the Red Wings are going to make the playoffs is more about how difficult this division is, more so about how good this team is. Because I think the Red Wings are, a playoff caliber hockey team, but I think so are 6 other teams in this division.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to make for some great battles as the Detroit Red Wings are hoping to close the gap here too. Just a reminder that you could listen to both of our podcasts anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you could also check out Scotty Bentley on Locked On Tigers every single day too. So
I was gonna whisper that.
So hey, glad that I've got that plug in too. But guys, thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to see you guys very, very soon.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's always a fun conversation.
Absolutely, and make sure you guys tune in later this week for more editions of both of our shows, Locked On Panthers and Locked On Red Wings. And as Brian Fisher says, same time, same place.
Same place.
It's your team every day.
Every day.
Every day.